thank you everyone for coming by on Friday afternoon. We know there are some other things going on in the building, but Representative Loon and I just wanted to take some time this afternoon, now that it appears any progress, or at least the major progress we laid out at the start of the session, is finished for this session, to talk a little bit about what happened during the session and where things might go from here. So if you want to start with some comments, I can.
Sure. Well, I think both Senator Reinert and I are very disappointed that, as we laid out, there were some sort of small steps towards Sunday sales that we identified, and one of those being growler sales on Sunday. It was very clear from the committee action in both the House and the Senate Commerce Committees that there was strong support for allowing growler sales. In fact, I think it was probably unanimous support in the committee, certainly in the House side. The Senate did have a vote to put the growlers back in, and the bill was pulled from that. Unfortunately, the process that happened in the House yesterday when we voted was one in which an amendment to an amendment was filed to a non-germane bill. So it precluded any further changes to the liquor legislation as put before the House. So the growler piece had been removed. The rest of the omnibus liquor bill was put in an amendment that could not be changed through our procedures in the House. There was a fair amount of discussion about that procedure, a fair amount of unhappiness, and I'm confident if a member had been offered or had been able to offer the growler provision, it would have passed the House. So, the process did not work in a way that really reflected the will of the people. Growler sales are conducted by small craft brewers. These are small businesses which have started in our state. It's an important part of their revenue stream. Starting and building a brewery is a very expensive enterprise. And so it's just disappointing that our legislature wasn't able to stand behind these small businesses, allow them to expand this revenue stream, and to be successful.
And I would just echo those comments. We stood here, I guess, almost 3 months ago with a whole array of options. Everything from just a straight-up full repeal of the Sunday sales ban, which both Representative Loon and I support. The local options, we each had a version of that, all the way down to what we considered to be baby steps, and that was the growler sales. And as we look at what we moved forward the growler sales out of recognition of the concerns of various interested parties. And why was this the one path that, as Representative Loon noted, made it all the way to the House floor without any objection, I think. In the Senate, we had good hearings, passed on overwhelming voice votes. For the Capitol Corps, that a voice vote is a signal that it's not a very controversial item. Then we had the omnibus liquor bill, including those provisions, done in 5 minutes. No debate, no discussion, no testifiers, again, a voice vote. And then all of a sudden things come to a screeching halt. And these were the provisions we chose to move forward because growlers are not something sold in liquor stores. Nothing in the bills would have even allowed a store to be open. And because they're not sold in stores, they're not carried by Teamsters. And these are our two traditional opponents. And yet, somehow this session we weren't able to move these provisions forward. And I think each of us are happy to talk about that. I would note, though, as I close some comments and then we can take questions, whatever is less than a baby step, is it maybe an infant crawl, that is the progress we made this year. So we would be remiss, I think, to not acknowledge that there was some forward movement. Our breweries across Minnesota that have tap rooms can now have their pint sales on Sundays, so they can have those 7 days a week. And something I'm particularly passionate about, the Growler Freedom Bill, or the idea that if you're a fan of several microbrews, you don't have to own several growlers connected to each of those, is now, or will hopefully soon be law. So I in the course of that bill, heard from many a spouse who was tired of their other spouse having about 18 different growlers in their house. So, like I said, less than a baby step, maybe it's an infant crawl, but forward progress. And I think anyone who watched this issue this session knows that there was far more energy and engagement, not only by the advocates, the constituents who are very interested in this issue, but a multitude of players, and especially the businesses. I think we both were impressed by the degree to which the Minnesota Brewers Association and the Brewers Guild really got involved, and members heard from these small businesses in their districts, and that was reflected in the 43-22 vote in the Senate to put the language back into the bill. So with that, I think we're happy to take questions.
I wonder, big picture, what's going on in the House and the Senate earlier. How can the legislature be on the way to legalizing medical marijuana, but you still can't buy a growler on Sunday?
Well, I think that is the question of not just this year, but this session, our 2-year period. So here is a legislature that last year supported marriage equality. I was very supportive of that. Representative Loon was on board for that as well. Earlier this week, the Minnesota Senate overwhelmingly adopts medical marijuana. I was supportive of that as well. But yet Sunday sales is a bridge too far. I mean, it just doesn't. That's going to be the takeaway message from this session. People understand this issue, and they're going to go, okay, here was this legislature that could do these two really big things that have to do with the relationship between government and individuals, especially their personal lives, and yet somehow Sunday sales is the one that doesn't shake out in that. And what I've consistently heard from people is that's the most no-brainer of the three. So as voters go away from this session and think about the campaign election this fall, gubernatorial, the governor's race on the ballot and the House race on the ballot, I really do think this is going to resonate as a campaign issue this fall.
Absolutely. And just to add a little bit to that, I mean, if you really sit down and look at our liquor laws, our statutes, they make little sense and extremely inconsistent. When folks opposed to Sunday sales rail on that, I must point out we do allow Sunday sales, but only in certain limited instances. If you're a farm winery, you can sell bottles of your product from your farm winery on Sundays. That's allowed. So when we've got to do liquor bills to allow a municipality to allow their golf course to sell beer and that, I'm not sure that that's the type of legislating that needs to be done from the state level. Mm-hmm. So we've got a lot of control over things that are really best left to the municipal jurisdictions, and our liquor laws are really rife with inconsistencies and just policies that don't make sense.
Representative Loon, are lawmakers not representing the public? This polls higher than almost anything this legislature faces, and yet there's still no action on it.
In my opinion, absolutely yes. They are not. And I think, I don't want to speak for every legislator because each legislator knows their own district and their own constituents best. Clearly from those polls, you can see that there's overwhelmingly strong support for changing these laws. And I think it's high time we try to get a real debate with real action where all members are allowed to offer suggestions, offer changes to laws. Let the legislature work its will.
Will it be a campaign issue? Senator Reinert suggested this might. House members talk about this on the campaign trail?
Absolutely. I think they will be.
You said there's a coalition that's grown up around this. Will they be active, as far as you know, raising money, making this an issue in campaigns in the fall?
My understanding is that they will be. I think I would not be surprised if shortly after session adjourns that you all aren't invited to a gathering of that coalition to talk about their strategy for moving forward and for this to be a campaign issue. My sense is that they're probably going to form some sort of voter education organization and ask candidates to do surveys. We do tens of those in an election cycle, including the House and the gubernatorial candidates, so that those groups can come in next session knowing who's on board and who's not. And, to Mary's question, at this point, clearly the legislature is not reflecting the will of Minnesotans. Yet that moves almost daily. Where we are at the end of this session, while the product may not show it, is very different in terms of mass and energy than where we were even at the start of this session. I recall at the end of last session saying to the Minnesota beer activists, I cannot push this rock up a hill by myself, and that was before Representative Loon got on board, which was a wonderful addition. I said you must find a way for people outside this building to be engaged, to be willing to make their voices heard, because the traditional way this issue has died is a lot of people outside the Capitol who say by 70-some%, yes, I'd like to see this happen. When asked, are you willing to do anything about it? No, not really. That changed this year. We had 4,000 plus emails. Brewers called their legislators. There was engagement, there was energy, and legislators who have traditionally voted no just out of habit more than anything have now had to actually visit the issue and think about it, and I think put it in the context of marriage equality, medical marijuana, but somehow Sunday sales is not doable. And when a thoughtful legislator puts all of that together, it doesn't make sense. And as Representative Loon said earlier, those of us who work in the commerce areas and look at how we treat the different parts of the liquor industry know it doesn't make any sense. If you're a winery, you can do 12 bottles on Sunday. If you're a brew pub and now a tap room, you can do on sales. If you're a micro distillery, you can't do anything. I think, I'll speak for myself at least, I am convinced that we ought to treat these growing micro industries equally, that we ought to have the wine sale, the up to 12 bottles on a Sunday, we ought to be able to sell growlers on a Sunday, and the micro distillers ought to be able to sell a bottle or two. And that lets all of these almost exclusive small businesses, right? We're in a building where that's all people talk about. We're going to support small businesses. It lets them have access to revenue that they need in order to support and grow their small business.
So the taverns and Teamsters are more powerful in this place than whoever you have supporting you? You haven't named your opponents yet.
Well, I mean, clearly the Teamsters were the ones who had, from my understanding, they did not speak to me personally, but had come forward in raising concerns that their contracts would be reopened with the wholesalers. But name of said wholesaler was never put forward in that. And I don't know how many interviews they did with the press about that, but it's my understanding they had no comment to a number of the stories that I saw. So I think that is a big question. And, I will say, the issue of Sunday sales in the broader sense, certainly there are differences of opinion yet in the legislature. But when you've got an issue like growler sales, which is a much more narrow provision and clearly having support of, I think, the majority of legislators, but a very small but powerful group of legislative leaders being able to stop that. I think you're going to see a real pushback and frustration from members by utilizing, again, procedural processes to silence that, that position. I think you're going to see a lot of legislators start to push back stronger on some of these liquor issues and on Sunday sales.
Based on your
And-
experience, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I want to be clear, if I'm asked, who is responsible for this not making progress this session, it's the Teamsters. We were on green light go paths in both the House and Senate until after the bill had cleared the Commerce Committee and the Teamsters started to go around and gel up opposition. And, I will say, while they talked to me, never was I shown language, never was the wholesaler identified, which now, a month later, just makes me very suspect about that argument. I think it really was just opposition to a Sunday sales repeal. If you look at what the Senate did earlier this week in putting the growler amendment back on the omnibus liquor bill, the Senate included language meant to take care of the Teamsters' concern just for good measure, even though stores don't sell growlers and Teamsters don't carry them. And yet that was still problematic. Yes, there were members that with Sunday sales concerns that jumped on board, but without that Teamster vehicle, there really would have been no standing for that. So in my opinion, who is responsible for this not moving the session? It's the Teamsters.
Based on your experience this session, next session, will you do a similar strategy of full repeal and other options, or will you just go no holds barred, full repeal, no small steps?
I don't think we've pre-conferred that, but
No, I mean, we'll have to do some discussion about that. Again, I think it depends a little bit on what moves legislators. I have talked to a few on my side within the House meeting that like the opt-in for local jurisdictions to give them the say. And, I favor that because I think, again, not every community is the same. And I don't want to make that decision for every community. And I think legislators see sort of the wisdom of that. And so I think it will draw more support. But I'm not shutting the door on just a full repeal or looking at some other options into next year.
So the full repeal will be part of it, but it may include other things.
Well, I think it's interesting. We tested the water in the Senate on these issues on Tuesday, and there was a 1-vote difference between full repeal and a local option. And in the Senate, we tried, now opt-in as the ban goes away and a local jurisdiction can opt in to keep it. I like the opt-out, which is the ban stays in place, but a local jurisdiction can opt out of the ban if they want to. One vote difference. We only lost one vote between full repeal and a local option. So, we'll have to sort of see if that has more legs moving forward. I think both of us think it's not only the reasonable compromise, but the right way to proceed. It lets local units make decisions best for their part of the state. If you're a border town or a college town or the Twin Cities, it probably makes sense to have Sunday sales. If you're, I think back to the floor arguments on Tuesday. If you're a small town in the middle of Minnesota with a municipal liquor store, you probably don't do it, but those choices can be made. But, I walk away from this session wondering what path, how does any action in 2015 not end up in the Senate with the same result? So, do we have to really seriously consider putting this on the ballot? If you have something that 70% of Minnesotans want, but somehow can't make it through this building, then maybe it is time to make it a ballot question. If it's that controversial, more controversial than I think either one of us believe, in comparison to some of the other big issues this legislature has dealt with, then maybe it is time to just put it on the ballot and let the voters have a decision. It's certainly not complicated. People understand the issue. Wouldn't need multi-million-dollar educational campaigns. People would be able to go and just weigh in on whether they think that businesses should have the option to be open 7 days a week, and if consumers should have the option to make purchases 7 days a week.
Explore that a little more. How serious are you about doing a constitutional amendment on Sundays?
Well, I introduced it this session, but it was sort of a last resort. I thought that we had a number of reasonable provisions, and that we had settled on the most reasonable, what we considered baby steps. But as I walk away from this session, if we can't get baby steps to go through this legislature, and at least on my side of the equation, the dynamics aren't going to be any different in 2015, then maybe it is something that has to just be, maybe the legislature says this is too difficult for us to deal with. We'll put it out to the voters to let them make a choice.
Representative Loon, what do you think about a constitutional amendment regarding Sunday sales?
Well, when Senator Reinert approached me about it this year, I wasn't willing to support that. Again, I don't think we should be, rushing to put things on the ballot. However, given what transpired this year, I'm gonna step back and think about that a little more. And again, I would hate for us to have to go this route. I'm hoping that, again, with the grassroots activity and just constituents and voters weighing in with their elected officials throughout the election process, that won't be necessary. But I'm going to pay some close attention through this election season about what happens and what people running for office are saying about this issue.
Senator, you brought up the issue pretty early on about baby steps in this process. Your proposal might have even been when you rolled it out
And we
initially,
did.
or shortly
Yep.
after.
Right.
Do you regret that strategy?
Not at all. I think, and this is my own opinion, but I think both of us are considered pretty thoughtful legislators who want to try and work with people and find where we have common ground and build out. I think that's where our friendship emerged from. And so that was a part of that strategy. I think we said, here are a whole array of things we can support, but we're willing to work with others to see what you can support. And clearly that was the growler provisions, because stores didn't carry them and stores didn't carry growlers, Teamsters didn't deliver them. And that was evidenced in how quickly and easily it moved through the process until all of a sudden we hit this Teamster opposition, and that stopped it dead in its tracks.
Do you think other folks were unreasonable in the sense that you gave them the options, and maybe you should have not been reasonable right from the start and just said, hey, it's the full ban, and then negotiated later on in the whole process if you were forced into that position? Might you have gotten further?
I mean, my press release, I think the header is, we lost the battle, but I think we're one step closer to winning the war. While we might have lost on the growler issue, we have talked about this all session long, to the point where folks at home in Duluth think this is the only thing I'm working on. Because all of you like to cover it whenever something happens with it. I have to constantly assure them that there are other things. I can walk and chew gum at the same time. But I think that full session conversation has only raised the profile. I know personally, I can't. This was Easter dinner conversation. I mean, everyone outside this building talks about it because they understand it. And not everyone, is in agreement, but they get the issue and have an opinion on it. So, no, I don't regret that strategy. I think it was for us, in keeping with our type of legislating, finding the reasonable steps forward. And the way it unraveled, I don't regret either, because it's to only raise the profile of the issue and engage Minnesotans in the conversation.
What sort of outreach do you plan to make, or have you already made to party leaders or some of these powerful opponents?
Well, I think there'll be a lot more discussion. Obviously, we've got a pretty full plate between now and whenever adjournment happens with the issues that we have to resolve yet this session. But I know there have been a few people within our caucus that have come forward and said they'd be supportive of Sunday sales and that, with regards to who hadn't previously come that far as a result of our efforts. And I think that will continue. In regards to the previous question, you can Monday morning quarterback, how you maybe could have done things differently. But again, I think what Senator Reinert and I tried to do was assure people, as we were making a renewed push on this issue, that we would try to work with the appropriate committee chairs, legislative leaders, and try to work through a thoughtful process to allow adequate dialogue for supporters and opponents to express their will. And unfortunately, as things, as I said, played out at the end, it wasn't really a good process that occurred. And so, I think if nothing else, I'm hearing from people that are just really frustrated and angry over what was a very stilted process in which people weren't able to even offer an idea on the House floor, and that was is very angering and frustrating to them.
And I'm sorry, I would just say to your question, we're in real time. I guess I consider the rest in peace date on this today for the 2014 session. But clearly, if any member of this legislature thinks that makes this issue go away, they're wrong, and they're misreading the pulse of the public. The energy and engagement that we saw in 14 is only going to build during the interim and the fall campaign cycle and be even more present in 2015.
What about a full repeal of Sunday sales on the floor? It came up last year, but it didn't come up this year. Do you think it would have garnered more than the 20-some votes it got last year if it had been voted on the floor this year?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, I do think it probably would have. I don't know that it would have gotten close to enough votes to pass, I guess is the question. And, I did ask Chairman Atkins for a hearing on the Sunday sales, on my opt-in, opt-out proposals. Unfortunately, that request was not granted. And I think it would have given a great opportunity to air some of those questions and concerns that have been brought up by members. But as I said, unfortunately, the process was such that we weren't able to even offer the amendment.
And I would say, if you look at the vote earlier in the Senate this week, two things. One, there had been other opportunities earlier this session for a full repeal amendment to come, and I had asked members that I knew were supportive to not do that. I knew it wasn't going to pass, and I didn't think it was helpful to the overall progress on this issue. However, by the time we got to Tuesday, my thought was, why not? Let's see where people are at and let Minnesotans see where their members are at. And honestly, the 20-some votes on full repeal was significantly more than I thought we would have in the Senate. When you compare what the vote was in the House last year and, fractionalize that down to the Senate, their 20 votes become 10. So we more than doubled that. So, on the surface, it doesn't seem like a very strong vote, but it's much stronger than any one that the Senate has taken before. And as we look at sort of the autopsy of this issue, we see small, very small steps forward, but we also see this great foundation that's only going to be built on and enhanced over the interim and for next year. So,
Representative, how do you explain that to normal people who don't live in this building, that Sunday sales only has 20 votes in-house? A huge chamber.
Yeah, well, at the beginning of this year when we started talking about this issue, one of the things I pledged was to try to follow the process that has been traditionally used on liquor bills, which is the changes are vetted in committee, there's testimony taken. If you're for it or against it, you have the opportunity to speak about it. And so there is a very sort of, we follow the process almost to the letter of the rules on those bills. And I pledged to try to do that, but getting the Sunday sales conversation started in committee. Again, I'm disappointed I wasn't able to get a hearing to have that. And so I think what in the past, an amendment's just kind of been lobbed out there on the House floor without a lot of warning, without a lot of preparation for people to have the facts and have the chance to weigh those pro and con arguments and have that legislative history behind it. And I think that's very important to do with an issue that's controversial.
Well, what about, again, average people? They don't really understand the committee process or care if it's lobbed on the floor. How do you explain, again, the lack of support given the public goals?
Well, I think, again, there's been, as we've seen, there are some interest groups that are very powerful here within the House that have been able to kind of hold this issue at bay. And you do have a large number of people now who are weighing in on it, but you also have, some voters and constituents in that. This is not a top-line issue for them. So, for some members, there's a lot of other things that they're concerned about, and this is not an issue that falls to the top of their list.
And you also have just legislative inertia. We all know that there are a handful of issues that seem to come up every year. One of them involves a freeway just south of here. In the Senate, we deal with eyeglasses on a regular basis. And members just get used to how that's that amendment, and they hit their button. That's what changed this session on this issue. Instead of it being okay, I know how I voted on this 18 times before, I'm not even going to think about it, I'm going to hit the button and go back to checking my email. People now are engaged. Members are engaged in thinking about it. Yes, we need more in the Senate, 12 or 14 more. But it's forward progress. And, I think we were both optimistic at the end of the day. And, I'm disappointed that we didn't get further. I thought we had the small steps that were reasonable and not offensive and would help small businesses across Minnesota, especially in the brewing side of the equation. It's 8,000 jobs and $80 million in revenue and only growing, but that didn't happen. And we could either sort of spend our time looking backwards, or we can look at what did happen and the foundation that is there to be, I think, pretty successful in 2015. So, and I think maybe we should take one more, and then I know Representative Loon is missing some stuff on the floor that she probably wants to be back for. So, any other questions? All right, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.